2013, I have to say a special Happy New Year to Dr. John Webster, first of all.
Well, a very Happy New Year to both of you and to all the staff here in the studio and to all our viewers as well, wherever they may be. Excellent. Around the world, whatever.
Now, we're having a quick review of the birds for 2013, but there's also been some new birds on the horizon?
Yes, they're not on the horizon. They've been here. We've added 2 new species for 2013 to the bird record for Barbados, which actually takes us to 265 species that have been recorded on this island.
That's a big thing. I mean,
that is quite incredible. Of those, only 46 are resident. The others are either vagrants, meaning that they just have come once or twice or very infrequently, or they are migrants that will migrate from North America to South America, basically.
I'm not being facetious, but do bird watchers, when something like this happens, do you have a big party and celebrate? Gosh, we got 2 more, and we add to and we put out a new book, or what happens?
Well, we're going to bring up some pictures of them in a minute, but in one case, the bird wasn't just a new one for Barbados, it was a new one for the Caribbean region.
Wow.
It had never ever been seen in this region before. I would like to say a special word for the person who saw both of them and discovered them. That's Julian Moore. Julian wouldn't mind me calling him a neophyte bird watcher. As he would tell you, he's only been at it for about a year. But in that year, Julian has actually identified, well, he's found 2 new species for Barbados, and that's quite incredible. So Julian, wherever you are this morning, congratulations.
Congratulations,
again.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, since we're looking at new species, what are some of the conditions that will encourage new species to journey to the Caribbean in the first place?
Well, if we can just bring up the picture of the first new species that we had this year. This was the Striated Heron, and that arrived on the island on the 4th of July. The 4th of July, American Independence Day.
It was free.
I don't know what the significance was, but that's when Julian discovered it, and we all hustled across to St. Lucie to see it. I photographed it over the next 2 days many times. Now, this bird was expected on the island for some time. It's a bird that's been expanding its range, and my other good friend and ornithologist, Edward Messiah, had told me when he identified it, he said, "No, John, I was really expecting this for some time." Birds tend to expand their range, like the cattle egrets that came here from Africa back in the late 50s, early 60s. They were expanding their range, and the conditions were right for them to fly across the Atlantic to Barbados. And since then, they've never left. And, you know, to many people, they're actually a terrible nuisance because... But they do good things, as we've identified in previous programs. So the Striated Heron was something that was expected. And until comparatively recently, it was not a separate species from the green heron. But with lots of DNA work and whatnot, it was split off. And as we can see on the screen, it looks very similar to the green heron or gullin. It behaves similarly. It twitches its tail when it's feeding, and it has the same stalking method of feeding as a gullin. But you can see the colors, as shown on the screen, are rather different. The Striated Heron has a lot of gray in its neck, whereas the mature green heron has a very rufous color on its neck, and they're quite distinctively different when you have a chance to see them properly. Frankly, if I had seen it the way that Julian saw it, I probably would have missed it, because I was not expecting it. That's why you have to be always expecting the unexpected when you're into bird watching. And the next picture shows that they feed the same way, you know. There you have the green heron on the right, sticking its neck out. You remember that, Kimberly?
Yes, yes.
And the Striated Heron feeds the exact same way. So then we come to the common shelduck. That had never ever been seen in the Caribbean before, furthermore Barbados. We're not quite sure how it came here, but it is a European duck. This is a duck that is found in estuarine areas in the UK, and it feeds on things like mussels and whatnot. This duck just arrived here and shocked everybody, not just in Barbados, but around the Caribbean. It's rather interesting. If I'd seen it once again, I would have thought, that's a funny looking Muscovy duck. And I might have missed it, to be honest. But Julian, being observed, he brought our attention to it, and we zeroed in on it.
You call it a common shelduck. Is it because they're plentiful, or what?
I don't know why it's called common, but that's the name that's given to it. It's considered a Eurasian species, primarily from Europe. And the previous picture showed it actually with a pintail. It joined up with a flock of pintails after it got here for a few days. Now this arrived on the 18th of November, and it was here for about, we've seen some pictures of it in flight on the screen as we talk. It was here for about 10 days and then it vanished. During that time, one of my friends witnessed a very large peregrine falcon, probably a female, large and dark. She attacked it a few times on the ground. It was on the ground. Peregrines tend not to take birds on the ground, but only in the air. And he said he saw it come down at the Shelduck several times, and the duck squawked and carried on, and the peregrine eventually moved off. Now, if the duck had taken to the air, it would have probably been its death. We do not know if eventually that peregrine falcon did take it, because another day, the flock of pintails that it was with also was basically buzzed and attacked. The same friend I had saw the peregrine falcon actually hit a pintail duck in the air and knock it over the ear. It didn't take it, it knocked it out of the air, and immediately the pintail ducks went together in a tight knot. And that's the way they kind of protect themselves.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned the common shelduck being from Europe, because I recognized the actual duck from, don't laugh, the cover of many of Grimm's fairy tales.
Really?
The depiction of a duck of this kind, or looks a lot like this kind of duck.
I have to admit, I've never read Grimm's fairy tales.
Okay. Well, I want to raise a question. This duck, is there a chance that it might have mated with another duck here?
Not in by the way, it's a female. We were able to establish it. It's I think it was a first-year female. From the pictures I took, other friends overseas were able to say, well, because it has trailing white feathers, it's a
female.
First year, and someone else made it. Oh, we heard it honk. The vocalization is important in identification, and it honked rather than whistled. The males tend to whistle, and the females tend to honk. So
first year female duck, honk. Interesting.
Well, you know, that was really interesting in that it came from Europe, whereas most of our migrating birds come from North America. If we then look at the next interesting bird that appeared on the island, it's a common greenshank, also European species. And that arrived at Woodburn Shorebird Refuge there in the Woodburn area. That arrived in April, and it was around for a while. Then it vanished, and back in July, I think it was late June, early July, a greenshank appeared again in the north of the island. We don't know if it was the same bird or not. It wasn't seen for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden we're seeing one again. It's a small bird, but it's a European bird, and it was thrilling to see something that is very, very infrequently on our shores. They have been here before, but it's a rare bird.
Climatic conditions play a role in the migratory patterns?
Yes, they do. Very much so. For example, some of the birds that we're going to talk about a little later come up from South America, Trinidad, and they will typically come here if the winds are for a few days over the southwest. So the winds are favorable for them to make the trip across to Barbados.
Okay.
Interesting.
Tell us about our very elegant-looking friend here, the black-necked stilt.
The black-necked stilt is a very interesting bird. The legs are extremely long, and unfortunately he's standing in the water, but the legs are twice the length of what you see there. When they're flying, they stick way out behind. The black-necked stilt breeds freely in the Northern Caribbean. It has only once ever bred in Barbados that we're aware of, and we found that about 2 years ago in the Walker's sand hole, where they quarry the sand. A pair of them actually bred there and produced 4 young. And it was interesting to watch as the young got older, that they took them around the island further and further, strengthening their wings and taking them on what we call the island tour. And eventually they migrated off the island because we didn't see them any longer. But before that happened, one of the adults vanished. I don't know if somebody killed it, if a mongoose got it. It just vanished. So, whereas we had 6 birds, when they left, it was only 5, unfortunately. The Wilson's Phalarope is the next one. That is a bird that used to be here in small quantities during the migratory season, towards the end of the migratory season, which is like into October, November. This one appeared when we were actually looking for the Shelduck, and we found it there. It's normally quite difficult to get up to it, but this one was particularly cooperative, and it was around for maybe 2 weeks. It's a small bird, and it has an interesting way of feeding. It likes to swim. It's a wader, but it likes to swim. The Phalarope swim, and it tends to spin itself around, creating vortices in the water, and in so doing, pulling up little insects or food from lower down the water. I watched it feed for many hours, actually.
Interesting.
It fed in a variety of ways.
Is it a duck?
No, it's a wading bird. But it thinks it's a duck, it seems, because it likes to swim.
My goodness.
What is interesting about the Phalaropes, and there are 3 species in the world that I'm aware of, is that the females are the more colorful members of the species.
Which is unusual.
And the males incubate and raise the young, while the females go off and cavort looking for other males. And that's not a joke, that's for true.
That is quite unusual. We need to get back to that. 12 minutes before 7. I say tempting because the Wilson's Phalarope, as you mentioned, Dr. Webster, doesn't seem to recognize that it's a bird and not a duck. But when we come back, we're going to find out more about this very interesting creature on Breakfast with the Birds on Morning Barbados.
I am your mother, aunt, grandmother, guardian, friend, and I promise to protect you in all situations because someone has hurt you, violated you, harmed you, abused you, and you were brave enough to tell me you trusted me. You came to me for help, to defend, for support, to protect you. No amount of money or bribes, favors, or gifts will stop me. You are most important to me. You are worth more to me than any material thing. I will do all in my power, in my heart, to make sure that you are taken care of, and that justice is served, and you thrive. Together, my daughter, my son, my child, we will live and love. I will protect you. Break the silence. Report all cases of child sexual abuse.
Morning Barbados, good morning. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Morning to you.
Welcome back. It's Breakfast with the Birds with Dr. John Webster, and we're moving right along through some of the other species that he would have seen, and this is the wood sandpiper?
Yes, the wood sandpiper was last seen in Barbados in the Constitution River about 2 years ago. We have no idea whether this is the same one that has returned, but it's actually been around in the swamps in the East Coast near where you live, Kimberly, for almost a month. It comes and goes. I thought it had disappeared and it's back again. So that's a Eurasian species again. It comes across from Europe, whereas the Wilson's Phalarope is a North American species. Let's move to the ducks. We've had a flock of northern pintail ducks around, and the male of the pintails is very, very, very beautiful. The first picture that we have here shows a flock of 7, 1 male and 6 females.
I can pick
he has quite a harem. And that flock has actually increased to 11, and we saw it last in Chancery Lane. This was seen in a private pond in Searles. In Searles. The male is in the center of that picture, and the next picture actually shows a close-up of a male pintail duck that I photographed somewhere else here recently.
Is it the beak that defines the male?
Well, it's his entire coloring.
Plumage,
His plumage is very different to the females. The females are quite drab and
Dull?
not distinctive, but the male, you cannot make a mistake with the male. Their method of feeding in our next image shows they do a bottoms-up type feeding. In other words, they go head down to feed at the bottom. And this picture shows all 7 of them feeding in the same spot. Quite a mass set of feeding. The male seems to be telling them what to do, you notice? And then our next image, and remember how they feed, because we're going to come to another species of duck that was in the same pond as well. They feed differently. The next picture shows that flock in flight, and the male is in the center of the flock, but he often took the lead, so he would tend to move forward and take the lead. Then we come to some lesser scaup ducks. We've always tended to have a number of these come to Barbados every year, and I've been seeing a flock of up to 6 of them in the east of the island. And the male again is a distinctive one with that white back, like the silvery white back. And then the picture following that, the image following that, is that flock in flight, and it's actually being led by a male pintail that is in a molt. He has molted, and he subsequently came out with nice plumage several weeks later.
Okay.
He's hung around. The scaups seem to have moved on. We then come to the American widgeons, and I just love this picture. I watched these widgeons for about an hour and a half. They didn't detect me. I was able to get up close. They're in the same pond as the pintail ducks. And in this picture, they basically came together as like, okay, let's get a family picture. And I was just amazed at how they posed for me.
They seem to move in symmetry too.
Pretty well, yes. They were very much in sync with each other as they moved around the pond. And if we have the next image, then we'll see how they feed. These are dabbling ducks. They don't dive down like the pintails in the bottom. The pintails are not true diving ducks either, but they will upend. That's the word I was looking for, upend. Whereas these widgeons here are now dabbling. Notice how they just kind of put their beaks in the water and move across, sieving out anything that they can get from the water. And then our next image shows the same flock in flight, the same 3 widgeons.
Which is the male? Is there a male there?
The male is distinctive, but this flock did not have a mature male. I subsequently saw a mature male. There were then 11 widgeons at Chancery Lane, and one of those was a mature male. He had a lovely green splash over his eye, very distinctive. I want to take a quick look now at Royal Westmoreland. Royal Westmoreland has this fabulous pond just inside its entrance. Unfortunately, it's a gated community, so you can't gain access unless you know someone or you're invited in. I've been privileged to be able to go there recently, and the ducks on the pond are quite phenomenal. If we move to our next image, we'll see a picture that shows a mass of ducks. The majority of these ducks are actually black-bellied whistling ducks. And the image coming up will show a small flock of them from that big flock. That flock is about 200 black-bellied whistling ducks right now. Last year, my wife and I counted about 300. The difference this year is that we don't see many juveniles. Last year, about 20% of the flock was juveniles. If you look at the picture following, you'll see the black-bellied whistling ducks feeding on the side of the pond, and in the center of it is a rather rare duck for Barbados. It's the West Indian whistling duck.
How is that rare if it's a West Indian duck?
Well, somehow it doesn't come to Barbados like the others. We've only had 3 of them come here about 2 years ago, and this one was here last year. We think it's the same duck, and he's back again, or she's back again this year. The West Indian whistling duck tends to breed in the Northern Caribbean, in like Cuba and San Domingo, the Bahamas, whereas the black-bellied whistling ducks are from South America primarily. They're very common in Trinidad and in the Venezuelan area.
Why are they called whistling ducks?
Because they whistle. They have a most distinctive whistle. When they take off at night, you can hear the whistle quite distinctly all around the place. I have a couple of images following here now that show individual ducks. This is a single black-bellied whistling duck on the pond at Royal Westmoreland, and that's followed by the West Indian whistling duck. Quite different plumage. The West Indian whistling duck, as you will have seen before, is a bit bigger than the black-bellied whistling ducks. And then we have the fulvous whistling duck. We had 5 of those at Royal Westmoreland as well. There used to be a lot more of those, but the numbers of those are declining. That duck is actually found around the world pretty well, and there's an African subspecies too. I'd like to end this morning session with a quick look at 2 bits of art that this painting by Rommel Earwood was actually given to me. These are two people that have asked for permission to use my work.
Before we get there, I'm going to have to indulge you to backtrack on the ducks for us, because we want to know a little bit about how the ducks got to Westmoreland. But we want you to stay with us for a little bit. I'm still kind of stuck on the West Indian whistling duck. I'm still a little stuck on that one. But I want you to stay with us. Welcome back. Like we promised, we head on back to the cool waters of the lake, and we journey to Royal Westmoreland once again with Breakfast with the Birds and Dr. John Webster. Now, before we went to news, weather, and sports, I was wondering about the black-bellied whistling duck. Where do they come from?
Well, all indications is that they migrate from South America, probably through Trinidad. The population expands, as I indicated earlier, to maybe 300 birds or more. Some actually do nest in Barbados. None of them nest in Royal Westmoreland. That's been established. There's no nesting of any of the ducks apparently in Royal Westmoreland's main pond. There's ponds in the Soles area where we know that they have nested around. I saw some young ones there. There was a small flock of 12, and there were 2 adults and the others were juveniles. So they had been produced at the ponds there in Christchurch. And we've seen other ponds where they have nested. That is small quantities of the population that remain. However, when conditions start to turn unfavorable, like when the ponds around the island start to dry up, it appears that the main flocks do migrate off the island. The 300 plus ducks that we see in Royal Westmoreland are actually several smaller flocks that have aggregated in that pond. And on a night, and I was there last night, I went to visit someone, and we arrived about 6:30, and you could hear them taking off, and they make quite an incredible whistling call. Many people are familiar with it, but that was the first time I'd seen so many in flight at night time, and they're constantly communicating with each other. And it's almost deafening at times. Where they go to, we're not sure, but there are ponds around the island that are still full of water, and they seem to go off to spend the night in these other ponds. But early next morning, they return to Royal Westmoreland because they know that they're going to get food.
I raised the question about eating ducks. Is there any real threat from humans to these ducks?
Well, last year there was a concern that cropped up on Facebook, and I won't call any names, but there was a concern that the ducks were being shot because the numbers had seriously declined. And I was quite vociferous in that they were not being shot. I've been studying them for long enough, following them, to be of the opinion that they do migrate off island, because many of the ponds that they seem to go to during night had dried up. So yes, they may still be being fed in Royal Westmoreland, but they don't sleep there. Most of them do not sleep there. I'd like to compliment the couple that actually do feed the ducks, and that's Barry and Susan Pape. At their own expense, they feed the ducks, and it's really quite something nice, because you can go and see the ducks there if you're invited in. As I said, unfortunately, it's a gated community, so you can't just walk in. I'm pretty sure that they go back to South America when the conditions are not favorable, and then as the weather, they seem to know when there's water in Barbados. I don't know how they do it, but they seem to know that the conditions are favorable again, and they come back. They may go to some of the other islands as well, but they're very common in Trinidad and Venezuela.
Barbados is their Capistrano.
Well, looks that way.
So, having said that, obviously we might have the opportunity to see black-bellied whistling duck in other parts of Barbados besides.
I've seen them all over the island. I've photographed them in many ponds on the island, and they're usually very trusting ducks. And it's, you know, the people that do hunting in Barbados do not shoot them. I do want to make that very clear. The hunters have accepted that these ducks are just too stupid to shoot, because you could decimate the whole flock in no time at all.
Wow.
They're trusting ducks, and it would be terrible if people did shoot them. So I can tell you almost without any doubt that they are not shot in Barbados.
Okay. You had made some reference to the
Some artwork, you know?
yeah. the acrylic painting by Rommel Yearwood. Talk to us about Rommel Yearwood, who he is, and what's his relationship with Breakfast with the Birds.
Well, actually, I wanted to bring Rommel on at some point to talk about his work, because he does some incredibly nice paintings of birds. He's a bit of a photographer himself, but he's an excellent bird artist, but he paints other things too. But this particular painting he did and gave me as a birthday present back in November, and it's painted from one of my pictures. He's one of several people who've actually contacted me and asked me, is it okay if I use your pictures for study work and to paint from and whatnot? And I was quite pleased when he gave me this. It's a banana quit that's feeding on the flowers of an immortelle tree, and it was quite beautifully rendered. He had an exhibition a couple of years back where I met him, and he had quite an assortment of bird paintings, which were quite impressive. I'm not sure where Rommel sells his work, but people do buy his paintings, and he's becoming quite a collectible artist. The other images, we had Cherise Ward, forgive me, on the show early last year, and she continues to, as she put it, get inspired by some of my photography.
I honestly find these last pieces to be quite unusual, don't you think?
Yes, they are, and I have to ask forgiveness from her. She gave me an artist statement on these, and I could not find it last night. But I have acquired these pieces because I was really impressed by what she did. And they're not supposed to be freaky pieces. Essentially, she loves the birds, and she's fascinated by the human body and its components. So she's merged birds with different organs of the body. The one on the left is the heart, and she has hummingbirds basically circling around the heart. The one in the center is the brain, and she's used the yellow warbler to circle around the stem of the brain. And then the one on the right is the lungs, and she has the banana quits exploring the innards of the lungs. Cherise is not a weird painter. She's just extremely creative and an excellent illustrator. She just illustrated her mom's book of poems as well, which was released in December. I really like her work. She had prepared these for a fundraiser at Christmas. Every year she and her boyfriend and a few others get together and decide who they're going to help for Christmas. And they invite other artists to bring in samples of their work, and they sell them at reasonable prices, and the funds are then used to help some less fortunate person or persons. So I was quite thrilled to be able to acquire these to add to my collection of her work. She's one of the artists that I like to collect her work.
Well, I remember Cherise, and I remember the designs that she had done, you know. Interesting stuff, very, very interesting indeed.
It definitely caught my attention, definitely.
What I will say is I will post these on the internet with her artist statement when I find it, because her artist statement was really great. It was short, but to the point, and I was a bit curious as to why she would have chosen such unusual things to put birds around, but it made sense when she explained. So I will put it on my Facebook page when I locate it, or ask her to send it to me again.
And finally, you brought some books along. Talk to us about the books.
These are the two books that I use extensively. The Birds of the West Indies by Herb Raphael. And this is a field guide, and he has a much more intense book that goes in a lot more detail. This way you can carry in the field.
But that's what I was going to ask you.
Right,
If, you know, for a neophyte bird watcher, and is that something you'd want to take along to help you identify?
Very much so. I had the pleasure, as you may remember me talking about earlier on the show, of actually meeting Herb Raphael. And he made us a very generous offer where if we want to do a field guide like this of Barbados, he's offered to allow me full use of all of his images and descriptions that we can then repackage into a field guide.
One bird.
So hopefully we'll be able to do that sometime in the near future.
Excellent. One bird that that for some reason again comes to mind, and you could tell me whether or not it's a Caribbean bird. I doubt that it is a puffin.
Oh, we'll never see puffins in Barbados unless they were put in some sort of cool environment in a sort of a zoo or something. Puffins are fascinating. I've never seen one myself. I read about them. I see a lot of pictures about them on Facebook pages I subscribe to. But puffins are really birds of the cold north.
So-
And what's fascinating is when they go fishing, they come back with a beak full of fish hanging out on both sides of their beak. They're really quite fascinating birds. I honestly don't know a whole lot about them because we'll never see them in this part unless we have such a major climate change that we're wearing furs in Barbados.
That's true. Well, I take your point on that. And one last bird that if my memory serves me correct, there was one spotted many years ago. I do believe it was featured on CBC in the news many years ago, was an owl.
Yes, every so often we have burrowing owls that come up from Trinidad. I've never been privileged to see one myself, other than the photograph 2 years ago in the newspaper that someone got a picture of in, I think it was in the Fort George Heights area. But every so often the burrowing or pygmy owls do tend to come from Trinidad to Barbados. There again, it's probably to do with the southwesterly winds for a few days, and somehow it comes across.
I was looking at a picture of an owl that can turn its head almost all the way around, not completely around because it'll break its neck, but because the eyes are so big that they have to turn, you know, they can turn pretty much close to the back to see you.
Remember when we were doing the little series on the predators, the birds of prey, we discussed how the eyes are fixed straight forward. So unlike the blackbird, for example, which has its eyes on the side of its head, the owls, like all other birds of prey, raptors, have their eyes fixed on the front. So the only way they can see where they want to see is to turn their head from side to side. And they're created in such an amazing way that they can honestly turn their heads through 180 degrees. And it's quite amazing. An owl is truly an amazing bird.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that.
What is interesting is there's been a flurry of snowy owls that have migrated from the northern climes down into as far south as Florida. There have been 2 or 3 seen in Bermuda, which is quite, I think, almost unheard of before. The climate has changed so much in recent time. We've having these terrible cold spells that the owls have found it possible, the snowy owls have found it possible to migrate much further south than is normal.
Yeah, the chance they can end up in Barbados?
Not likely.
Because, you know, the temperature
Never say never.
in Florida has been at freezing in North Florida and just slightly above freezing in South Florida, you know, so.
It's quite a over water distance for them to get here, and that's something that you got to think about. Just for them to get to Bermuda is quite amazing. I was discussing with someone from the Audubon Society in Connecticut last weekend who was here, and he was saying, you know, okay, 2 or 3 made it. I wonder how many more dropped in the ocean, because owls aren't designed for that long
journey.
Flight.
Well, here's a ticket for you. If the snowy owl can decide to venture further, as far south as Florida, maybe, just maybe, a puffin might not be too far.
Oh, well, we'll have to wait on that one and see what happens.
Clearly, I guess you know by now, that's my fascination. I'd love to see a puffin.
Okay, good.
So we've had a good start to the year. We are looking for more species, hopefully, to add to the 265. Dr. Webster, are you seeking to add to that number yourself?
Well, I would be thrilled to do what Julian has done and find even one new species for the year. And Julian was just amazing with what he came up with. He's very dedicated, and he's always out there with his camera trying to capture the new birds. He set himself an interesting goal for last year, actually, where he wanted to see and photograph 100 bird species on the island. Poor fellow, he didn't quite make it, but you know, he might not have made his 100 species. He got to 80 something, but he did get 2 new species in that lot.
That is remarkable.
Most of us will not have that privilege.
Wow. Well, we certainly enjoyed this morning. I'm going to sit and wait for my favorite, the Wilson's
Phalarope?
Phalarope, yes.
By the way, there are 3 species of phalarope, and there's one called a redneck phalarope, which is quite rare in Scotland. They captured several of those and tagged them with a very tiny tag. This story broke on the BBC news yesterday, I think it was. a very tiny chip was attached to some of these Phalaropes, and they were released. One was recaptured recently, and the chip was analyzed, and they found that that bird had had an incredibly long journey. I can't remember what the distance was, but rather than simply flying from north to south, that bird had basically traversed sort of east to west into the Pacific region from Scotland and back. So it's one of the longest bird flights that they've been able to track so far.
Interesting stuff indeed. Dr. John Webster, it's always good to talk to you about the lives and times of birds and the business of bird watching. We're going to take a break and come back with more on the Friday edition of Morning Barbados. Please stay with us.